You're wasting your potential, Alexandra. You're working from coffee shops like some wannabe entrepreneur. You have a degree from Cornell. You could be working at a real firm, designing important buildings, making real money. My Uncle Richard stood in his kitchen at Christmas dinner, glass of wine in hand, performing his annual assessment of my life choices to anyone who would listen. My cousins were already smiling in anticipation. They'd heard this speech before. The one where Uncle Richard positioned himself as the concerned family member, while simultaneously making it clear that he thought my career was a joke. Instead, you're freelancing, living in some tiny apartment. At your age, you should be established. Married, probably. Definitely not working from a cafe like you're some kind of starving artist. I set down my fork and smiled politely, the way I'd learned to do years ago when I realized that defending myself would only fuel his certainty that he was right. I'm actually quite happy with my work, I said calmly. And I'm building a strong portfolio. A portfolio, Richard laughed. Sweetheart, portfolios don't pay rent. Real jobs do. Real firms do. Maybe after the holidays, you should think about applying somewhere legitimate. I didn't tell him that I'd just been offered a $12 million project. I didn't mention that my current portfolio included 3 award-winning residential designs and 2 commercial projects that had been featured in Architectural Digest. I didn't explain that I chose to work independently because I valued creative freedom over the politics of corporate architecture firms. He wouldn't have understood anyway. My name is Alexandra Morrison, and I was 34 years old when my uncle decided my career was pathetic. I had a master's degree in architecture from Cornell. I'd spent 5 years working at Gensler, one of the world's largest architecture firms, before deciding that I wanted to work on projects that mattered to me, not projects that mattered to paying clients who hired architecture firms based on their corporate prestige. 3 years ago, I'd gone independent. I took on projects I believed in, commercial spaces that prioritized sustainability, residential designs that worked with their environments rather than against them, community buildings that served actual community needs. My work was published. My designs won awards. I made good money. But I worked from cafes, which apparently made me a disappointment to my uncle. Richard owned a mid-sized manufacturing company that had been in our family for 2 generations. He'd inherited it from his father, grown it modestly, and spent most of his time congratulating himself on his business acumen. He'd never missed an opportunity to remind people that he was successful, while simultaneously treating anyone who worked differently than he did as somehow deficient. When he told me in January that he was building a new corporate headquarters, I'd made a mental note. Don't mention that I'm an architect. Don't engage. Don't bother. I certainly didn't expect him to hire me. The email came in March. It was from Richard's executive assistant, not Richard himself. Mr. Morrison would like to commission you for the design of his new corporate headquarters. Please send us your standard contract and project proposal template. I called Richard directly. Why are you hiring me? I asked without preamble. You think I'm a wannabe working from a cafe. That was Christmas, Richard said dismissively. And I was joking. Besides, I showed your website to my business partner, Harold. He knows someone at Architectural Record. They featured some of your work. Harold said you're actually quite respected in architecture circles. So I thought, why not use someone from the family? It'll be good PR. Plus, you owe me a discount because we're related. There it was. The assumption that because I was family, I should charge less. The idea that my professional work was somehow less valuable because I worked from cafes. The entitlement that had defined Richard my entire life. I don't give family discounts, I said. I charge my standard rate, $250,000 for the design phase. If you want to hire someone else, I understand. But if you hire me, it's on my terms. There was a long pause. Then Richard said, fine. Send me the contract. I spent 6 months designing Richard's new headquarters. I created something extraordinary. A 3-story building that emphasized natural light, open collaboration spaces, and sustainability features that would reduce the company's carbon footprint by 40%. I designed a conference center that could host community events. I included green space that employees could actually use during their breaks. I was proud of the design. Not because it was Richard's building, but because it was good work. Richard, predictably, wanted to change everything. He wanted marble columns in the lobby. He wanted a massive executive suite on the top floor. He wanted the building to look expensive, important, impressive. All the things that actually compromised good architectural design. "It looks like a government building," he complained after I showed him the initial renderings. "I want it to look impressive. Powerful." "It is impressive," I said calmly. "What it's not is ostentatious. And there's a difference between powerful and pretentious." "I'm paying you $250,000, Richard said. "I want something impressive." "You're getting something impressive," I replied. "You're getting a building that will win awards, that will be featured in major architecture publications, that will actually make your company look innovative and forward-thinking. If you want marble columns and excessive executive suites, hire someone else. But you won't get the same caliber of work." Richard backed down. He usually did when faced with actual professional conviction. The ribbon cutting was scheduled for May. The building had been completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. It was genuinely stunning, a perfect example of form following function, of design that enhanced rather than dominated. Richard was giving himself all the credit, naturally. He'd mentioned in the local news coverage that he'd overseen the design personally and worked closely with the architectural team to realize the vision. There was no mention of me as the lead architect. There was no credit given for the months of design work, the sustainable features, the innovative space planning. But that was fine. I didn't need Richard's credit. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was packed. Local business leaders, city council members, employees of Richard's company, media representatives. There was a stage set up for speeches. A ceremonial ribbon. The whole performance of a significant building opening. Richard gave a speech about his vision for the company. He talked about the importance of creating a workspace that inspired innovation. He talked about his commitment to sustainability. He said absolutely nothing about the architect who had actually created everything he was claiming credit for. Then the mayor stepped up to speak. "This is a remarkable building," she said. "And it represents the kind of forward-thinking design that makes our community stronger. The architect responsible for this project, Alexandra Morrison, has designed 3 award-winning buildings in this community in the last 2 years alone. She's become known for her commitment to sustainable design and community-focused architecture." The mayor looked out into the crowd. "Alexandra, would you come up to the stage?" I stood up slowly, aware that Richard was staring at me with confusion on his face. I walked to the stage, and the mayor shook my hand. "This building represents your best work," the mayor said. "Congratulations." I looked out at the crowd, at the business leaders, the media, the employees of Richard's company. And I looked at Richard, whose face was going through a series of expressions as he finally connected the dots. His niece, the wannabe working from Café, had designed his new headquarters. The local architectural community understood immediately. The design team I'd contracted with knew. The construction company knew. But Richard hadn't bothered to ask who the architect was. He just assumed it would be some firm, some corporate entity. Not his niece. After the ribbon cutting, I was interviewed by 3 different journalists. 2 of them asked Richard if he'd known the architect was his niece. He said yes, of course, and claimed that he'd wanted to keep things professional by not mentioning family connections. The 3rd journalist asked me directly, "How does it feel to have designed one of your uncle's most important projects?" "It feels like I did my job," I said. "I was hired to design a building. I designed a building. The fact that it belongs to my uncle is less relevant than the fact that it's a good building." Richard called me the day after the ribbon cutting. "I didn't know you were that successful," he said without preamble. "I know," I said. "I've been telling people I designed this building," he admitted. "For weeks. Before the ribbon cutting." "I know that too," I said. "People tell me things." "I owe you an apology," Richard said. "For Christmas. For saying you were wasting your potential." "Yes," I agreed. "You do." "I'm sorry," Richard said. "I was wrong. You're clearly very talented." I didn't respond immediately. I was thinking about whether his apology meant anything, whether it mattered that he finally recognized my competence now that it had been publicly validated, whether his respect for my work had actually changed, or whether he was just responding to external confirmation. "Thank you for the apology," I said finally. "But I want you to understand something. I wasn't wasting my potential at Christmas. I was exactly as talented then as I am now. The only thing that changed is your perception of me. And that perception changed because someone else validated my work publicly. That shouldn't have been necessary. You should have believed me when I told you I was happy with my career." "I know," Richard said quietly. "Do you?" I asked. "Or are you just saying that because it's what I want to hear?" Richard didn't answer. The project won the American Institute of Architects Award for Commercial Design. My name was in every architectural publication covering the award. I was invited to speak at architecture conferences about sustainable commercial design. Richard attended my keynote speech at the National Architecture Conference. He sat in the front row and listened while I talked about the philosophy behind the design of his building. He heard me explain the sustainable features, the open collaboration spaces, the community-focused design decisions. After the speech, he came up to me. "I didn't know you were thinking about all that," he said. "When you were designing the building, I didn't understand what you were trying to do. I thought you were just making choices that didn't look important enough." "That's because you measure importance by how impressive something looks," I said. "I measure importance by how well something works. Those are different metrics." "I understand that now," Richard said. "I'm sorry it took winning an award for me to understand it." 2 years after the ribbon cutting, Richard retired from his manufacturing company. He decided to invest in real estate development, and he'd asked me to be his lead architect. I turned him down. "Why?" he asked, surprised. "Because I work on projects I believe in," I said. "Not projects that are family obligations. If you find a project that matters to you, a building that serves a real purpose, that improves people's lives, then hire me. But I'm not going to design buildings just because you want to hire me." Richard nodded. He understood now. Finally, a year later, he called me with a project. It was a community center in an underserved neighborhood. He wanted to fund it. He wanted me to design it. "This is a project I believe in," he said. "I thought maybe you would too." I took the project. And as I was designing it, I thought about Christmas dinner 3 years ago. About my uncle telling me I was wasting my potential. About how I'd known, even then, that his assessment didn't define my reality. The power hadn't come from proving him wrong. The power had come from knowing I was right, regardless of whether he believed me. Everything else was just the world catching up to what I'd always known.